Hi, I'm Marge Robeson, registered dietitian with Basonic Partners.
And I'm Louis Aguilar, chef at LCCAA Head Start.
And I am Melinda Gray, the food service manager at LCCAA Head Start.
We're so happy that you could join us today for part 2 of our Out of the Box series, Soup and Bread. Last time we made the soup, today we're making this easy, no-knead bread. Melinda, have you ever made bread before?
I have in a bread machine.
Oh.
It was hot out, that way the oven didn't heat up my home. But by the time I pulled it out, it was so small, my family ate it before it was even cold.
Nothing like homemade bread,
Exactly.
but it goes quick. And Louis, what about you? Have you ever made homemade bread?
I've made a variety of bread, which is kind of a layered texture, and it requires a griddle and really not oven, so it's stovetop.
Okay, nice. All different kinds of bread. Everybody loves different kinds of bread. I have not been a bread maker myself, but this recipe really intrigued me. I think because I'm always intimidated by bread with yeast and kneading. So when I heard of a recipe that you didn't have to knead, I thought, well, I'll try it. Got really great reviews, and since then I've made it many times. It makes the house smell wonderful and is really delicious. So we're excited to share with you, I would say, this really simple bread recipe. To me, the thing that really matters with this is being patient. And so I think this is a great recipe to do with kids because they can actually see how bread is made, but it's almost like Christmas when I make this because you'll see how we make the dough, tuck it aside, let it do its thing, and you wake up, I do it in the morning usually, and it's ready to put in the oven. So it can be a really fun cooking demonstration for kids to get involved with because it's also super simple.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me step aside and I'll let you two start baking.
Great, all right. So like we said, this recipe only has 4 ingredients. So bread that you buy in the store obviously is going to have a much longer ingredient list. So we love this recipe because it's super simple. So I'll let Louis get started with measuring out all 4 ingredients.
All right, for our first ingredient, it is flour. And I know that some people will use different types of flour, right? Did you?
Yeah. So Louis is going to measure. It calls for 3 cups all-purpose flour. I've, like I said, made this many different times, and I have, on occasion, for one of the cups of flour, substituted whole grain or whole wheat flour. So I'll do 2 cups of the all-purpose and 1 cup of whole wheat flour, just to add that extra nutritional value to the bread and give it some fiber.
And then the next, we'll add, well, would you say this is the all-star of the
The
recipe?
yeast does the
yeast.
magic.
So it does the magic, and we'll need a 1/4 teaspoon. And now the one we're using is instant yeast. So we're gonna add this 1/4.
Yeah, so this
That's a
is just so
teaspoon.
you can see the instant yeast. If you go to the store and buy yeast, you're gonna see the dry active yeast and then this instant yeast. For this process, it's really important that instant yeast is used. And of course, that's what we'll be sending home in your box.
It's the salt that we're gonna be adding now. It's 1.5 teaspoons.
Yeah.
So
So
then
make sure, if I can add, make sure you mix it well, because I have made this and my husband has eaten it and said, I can tell that that's homemade because I got a saltier piece. And I'm like, well, it shouldn't be like that. I just didn't mix it, I think, well enough. So even though it's all white things in there, the salt, the yeast,
yeah, you
make
want to
sure
incorporate everything.
make sure
kind of
you're
together.
mixing it well.
And then next, it's 1.5 to 1 3/4 of a cup of water. And we'll add this in here. And did you find that using all this water was sufficient? Have you had to add more with the different?
Yeah, so I know bread raising and activation of yeast and all of that can really be affected by the type of flour you use, conditions in the environment, humidity, heat, coolness. So you're gonna want this dough to be pretty sticky. So I have found if I've made it with all the white flour, that it really does require a generous 1.5 to 1 2/3 cup of water to get it that sticky consistency. If I use a whole wheat flour, of course that sucks up more water, so then I need almost the 1 3/4 cup of water. So I think we had 1 2/3 cup in there. You'll probably need most of that to get that kind of a sticky texture.
And definitely scrape the sides and incorporate all these well, just like we did with all our dry ingredients. Make sure you're incorporating all the wet in there with it also.
So this would be a great time. You can always add some mix-ins if you want. Maybe your first time, do it just the plain bread. But I might even roast some garlic and mix it in there, and or some herbs. I like to, when I make the whole grain bread, sometimes I'll put like sunflower seeds in it, or you could crush up some nuts. That would be great. You could do cheese. I think you're getting it almost perfect there. Yeah, so see how he's got the dough? It's gonna be, if you were to touch that, it's gonna be, let's make sure we show that. It's gonna be pretty sticky there. So that's that texture that you want. It looks very sticky to the touch, and that's good. You can't even picture that being bread, right?
Yeah.
So after you have it all well incorporated, then it's time to let it take its nap and do its thing.
Yeah, so you want to cover this loosely with plastic for about 12 to 18 hours. And this is where the patience comes in. You want to just be patient and let its yeast do its thing, and everything kind of, mix together and activate, do its thing.
Yeah. And if you could set it somewhere where it's not going to get a cold draft, I think it likes a little bit of warmth. So what I do, so this is how it will look, and then I would cover that with plastic wrap. Sometimes I even put it to bed and put a towel over it, and I have a warm inside room that I'll kind of set it in there overnight. I often make this at nighttime in the evening, and then when I wake up in the morning, it's good to go. So I actually did this last night. So you can see the difference. It goes literally from that, and then overnight, this has been now about 14 hours, but between 12 and 16 hours, you just want it to set. And that yeast made it very, kind of bubbly.
And that's where that carbon dioxide gas does. If you see these little bubbles that are forming, that's it's doing its work. That's that yeast doing its work.
Yep. So then when you cut the bread, you're going to get like those airy pockets.
It's pockets. It's essentially pockets that turn into steam, which are encased in that dough. And when it cooks off, it leaves that air pocket shell kind of behind, which is when you see the texture when you cut a loaf of bread open and you see all those little pockets. That's what that is.
Nice, nice. And what do you get now? That smell too. So if you could smell this, it smells very yeasty. So we are gonna now do the next step. So we're gonna clear out some of this so we can work with this dough. I'm gonna give you this dough. And so if you have a counter and you just want to throw some flour on there to kind of work out this dough, you can do that. We're gonna try it on this parchment. We're gonna work it on the parchment paper, just so we don't mess up this counter here. If you wanna spread some flour on there. And it's sticky dough, so you need a bit of flour. And some of that flour will be kind of incorporated there.
We'll start with that. And you could always add more as you need, just if it gets too sticky or your work surface is not.
Put it like this.
So
Lewis is just scraping that sticky dough on here. Again, the beauty of this is you don't have to knead it.
this, since it is a no knead, all we're gonna do is kind of work it slightly and just to get it into form. And get some flour on your hands just so that'll help prevent with the sticking.
And I have that,
This
this
here.
bench, if that kind of
Yep.
works too, if you have something like that.
Right.
So
And if
you
you
might
see
need
here,
to add
little
more
bit more
flour.
flour.
Yeah,
And this is one of the funner parts. It'd be a little bit messier, but I'm sure the kids will enjoy this.
yeah.
This is the part that they'll all enjoy.
And I think too, if you have a couple of kids, you could each give them a part of the dough to make their own, divide it and make 2 smaller loaves of bread. So he's just folding that kind of over on itself so it gets to a nice round shape and isn't quite so sticky.
Use a little bit more flour there.
Yeah, it's still a little sticky, so he's just working in enough flour until it's not quite as sticky.
Yeah.
And he's not overly working it though.
Yeah, you
like
want to just do it lightly. Because we also don't want to
break down
break
that.
down that yeast that's already developed in there.
All right, so he's getting it
And
there. It's looking pretty good. So you see how that's a kind of a nice shape. And I know the first time I made this, I thought, oh no, it got so big. And then by the time I worked it down, it got a little bit smaller, and I thought I'm gonna have a flat loaf. But again, when it cooks, it fluffs up more.
Yeah, all that steam that's trapped in there will help that elevate that back into shape, and again create those air pockets.
The optimal way to cook it is in something called a Dutch oven, right? And so a Dutch oven works great for this bread because what we do then is after you have your bread formed, you want to preheat your oven to, 425.
425.
So we'll preheat the oven to 425. You want your pan to be hot, right? So you can bake this, if you have a Dutch oven, I would encourage that. In your box, you'll be getting like a sheet pan, so that's another way to cook it. So if after you've turned on your oven and it's preheated, you want to keep your pan in there. Whether it be this pan or the Dutch oven, that needs to heat up in the oven. So I'd put this in the oven, 425 or this, let it get hot, and then you can put the bread on it, right? Now the beauty of the Dutch oven is it steams in there.
Yes.
So be careful when you take it out of the oven because the pot's gonna be hot. So use caution, watch kids in that phase of the process. But you would just take this and set it
Yep, set
right
it right
in
in.
there, okay? If you're using the sheet pan, because that doesn't give as much steam, then it's recommended that you add some water into the oven.
Yes. So we would take a pan like this, add maybe about an inch depth of water, and what that does is once you bake it, as it's baking, heats up the water. Doesn't come to a rolling boil, but it's just enough to create that steam, that moisture, like a moisture-like environment in the oven,
Yeah.
and it'll keep this from drying out.
Yeah. So again, a Dutch oven, you don't need that stuff, but it works perfectly well on the sheet pan. Preheat the oven, put the sheet pan in, and the water on the bottom shelf.
Yep.
And then sheet pan on just the shelf above. Once your oven is preheated, you're just gonna plop this on the sheet pan and put it in the oven. Okay, so we're gonna put these in the oven and come back so you can see the finished product. All right, so we've patiently been waiting, that bread cooking in the oven. It's starting to smell really good. And so it cooks for like 30 minutes.
And we'll go ahead and pull it out now.
So what are some of the ways that you know when it's done?
Yeah, so if it's cooking in the Dutch oven, it'll cook about 30 minutes. And then because it's covered in a Dutch oven, you'd want to take the lid off after about 30 minutes to let it get brown. You can see in the sheet pan, it got very brown. You don't even have to take off the lid.
No,
Right?
because in that element, while it's open in the oven, it'll brown the crust as it's cooking.
we costed this out. This is about 30 cents for this loaf of bread.
Yeah.
And what does bread cost in the grocery store now?
Oh, about $3.99, $4.99.
Yeah.
Expensive.
So a lot less expensive for a homemade bread. But do let it cool. So we've let this cool down a bit.
Okay.
And then, Louis, you want to do the honors of cutting?
And
And so that soup that we made last week, that's why we did the soup and the bread together, because who doesn't love a good soup with this crusty bread to dip into that? I like to sometimes have my bread dipped in like an olive oil that has herbs in it. This is a great bread to do that. And so, yeah, what does that look like there? We got some nice air pockets
look at that.
in there. So there's
Looks-
that bread. Nice.
And this is all the reward from that patience. That's all this is what we're working towards.
Yeah.
All these delicious air pockets.
Well, why don't you slice us up each a smaller piece there,
Okay.
and we'll try that, one of those. And yeah, I think this would be great with some butter on it, jelly on it, some cheese on it. So very good.
Thank you.
Sure. Mmm.
I
It
do
tastes
love
like
bread.
it tastes like, who doesn't love a good piece of bread? We hope you enjoyed this recipe as much as we did. Try something new. Let the kids join in with you. Of course, we always love pictures that you send us, and celebrating this. And we look forward to seeing you again in one of our out of the box cooking series. Thank you.